How can the face of a hero transform into the mask of a monster? And what if this transformation never happens, but both faces have always existed, side by side? The human mind is a labyrinth, and in high-profile cases, it becomes a public spectacle, where truth and manipulation dance under the spotlight. Welcome to The Truth, Dark Psychology. Today we will not just revisit one of the most controversial cases in history, but we will dissect the mind behind it, exploring how charisma can be a weapon and denial, a shield. If you want to understand the hidden tactics that govern human behavior, subscribe now and like the video, because we are about to analyze what dark psychology reveals to us about the mind of a cornered suspect. Long before he was a suspect, Orenthal James Simpson was an archetype of the American dream. He wasn't just an athlete, he was the juice, a charismatic hero, actor, and media personality whose fame transcended sports. This public persona, carefully constructed over decades, was his first and most powerful line of defense. Dark psychology teaches us that an overwhelmingly positive public image creates a powerful cognitive bias in the public's mind, known as the halo effect. People found it almost impossible to associate the charming smile they saw on TV and in movies with the brutality of a double murder. And this dissonance was his greatest protection. This image building is a long-term strategy, whether conscious or not, to become too big to fail. O.J. cultivated an identity that dissociated him from his origins and the racial tensions many faced. His famous quote, "I'm not black, I'm O.J.," reveals an attempt to position himself above the conflict, in a pantheon of celebrities where the common rules do not apply. This persona was not just a product of fame, it was an active psychological shield designed to make any serious accusation against him unthinkable, an anomaly that the public and, crucially, a jury would struggle to accept as reality. Behind this facade, however, the story was different. Reports of domestic abuse, jealousy, and a controlling temper existed long before the crime. Dark psychology explores this duality, the public mask of charm versus the private reality of coercion. The ability to keep these two faces separate is a characteristic of personalities with strong narcissistic and manipulative traits. They learn to perform normality and friendliness to perfection, while exercising control and dominance in their inner circles far from the public eye. The power of this persona was so great that, even in the face of evidence, many refused to believe. The public's mind had already been conditioned to see him as a hero. To question his innocence was for some like questioning the very values he seemed to represent: success, overcoming adversity, and charisma. This blind idolatry is fertile ground for manipulation, as the manipulator no longer needs to prove their innocence. They just need to rely on the public's reluctance to destroy the idol they themselves helped create. Therefore, the first lesson that O.J.'s mind teaches us is the preventive power of a well-managed persona. Before any evidence was presented in court, the battle for public perception had already been waged for years. He had built a fortress of goodwill and admiration that proved almost impenetrable, demonstrating that the most effective manipulation begins long before the crime is committed, in the careful fabrication of an identity that the crime does not seem to fit. Charisma is one of the most potent tools in the arsenal of dark psychology. In the case of O.J. Simpson, his legendary charm was not just a personality trait, it was a strategic weapon used to obscure facts and manipulate perceptions. Throughout the entire process, from the infamous white Bronco chase to his courtroom appearances, he projected an image that was not of a calculating murderer, but of a confused, wounded, and wronged man. He knew how to use his fame to generate empathy, a skill that elite manipulators possess to neutralize hostility and sow doubt. Simpson's defense team, the Dream Team, understood and exploited this charisma masterfully. They didn't just sell a theory of innocence. They sold O.J., the icon. The strategy was to transform the trial from a murder case into a referendum on race, the police, and celebrity. They shifted the focus from the evidence, the blood, the gloves, the history of abuse, to a larger, more emotional narrative of conspiracy and racism. This is a classic diversion tactic. When the facts are not in your favor, change the battlefield to one where emotions reign. Psychologically, this tactic works by overloading the logical reasoning capacity of the jury and the public. By introducing a narrative as powerful and emotionally charged as systemic racism within the LAPD, the defense created reasonable doubt that was based not on the absence of evidence, but on distrust of the source of that evidence. OJ's charisma and his lawyer's inflammatory rhetoric gave this narrative a credible face, turning the suspect into a symbol of a greater injustice, a pawn in a game much more important than his personal guilt or innocence. Even the most bizarre moments, like the slow-speed chase, were framed through this lens of charisma and victimization. He wasn't fleeing the law, the narrative suggested, but was in a state of despair. A man who had lost everything and was on his way to his beloved ex-wife's grave. This interpretation transforms an act of flight into an act of mourning, using emotional manipulation to completely recontextualize an incriminating event. The suspect's mind in this case does not fight the facts but reinterprets them publicly. In the end, OJ's charisma functioned as a filter through which all evidence was processed. For those who wanted to believe him, every piece of evidence presented by the prosecution was seen as part of the conspiracy that his defense painted so skillfully. Simpson's smile, apparent calm, and celebrity status acted as a constant, silent reminder. Do you really believe that I, OJ, could do this? This question, subtly planted in the minds of the public and the jury, was perhaps the most effective piece of manipulation in the entire trial. Denial is a fundamental psychological defense mechanism, but in the mind of a suspect like OJ Simpson, it can expand into a large-scale survival strategy. The level of denial exhibited, both by him and by a significant portion of the public, was monumental. For himself, denial can be a way to preserve sanity and self-image. An individual with extreme narcissistic traits may be psychologically incapable of accepting a reality in which he is the villain. His mind may literally rewrite events to maintain the perception of himself as the victim or the hero. This internal denial is projected outward as a performance of unshakable innocence. Simpson's calm and sometimes carefree demeanor during the trial was interpreted in two opposing ways. For the prosecution, it was the cold-bloodedness of a guilty man. For the defense and his supporters, it was the tranquility of an innocent one. Dark psychology shows us that this calmness can be a sign of emotional detachment, the ability to dissociate from terrible acts to maintain functionality. He wasn't necessarily acting innocent. He might have convinced himself of his own narrative. On a fundamental level, the phenomenon extended to society, creating mass cognitive dissonance. On one side, there was a mountain of physical evidence pointing to his guilt. On the other, there was the beloved image of O.J. Simpson, the American hero. Holding these two contradictory ideas in the mind at the same time is uncomfortable. To resolve this discomfort, many people chose to reject the evidence and cling to the image. It was psychologically easier to believe in a complex police conspiracy than to accept the terrible truth that a national idol was a brutal murderer. The defense brilliantly exploited this dissonance. The famous line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," is a perfect example. This theatrical moment was designed to be a powerful visual symbol that the public could grasp. It didn't matter that the glove might have shrunk from the blood or that he might have been forcing his hand. What mattered was the image. The glove didn't fit. This gave people who wanted to believe in his innocence tangible proof to resolve their cognitive dissonance, allowing them to ignore all other inconvenient evidence. The lesson here is about the fragility of truth when confronted with a deep psychological need to believe a lie. A suspect's mind can lock itself in a state of denial for self-preservation, but what is most frightening is how this denial can become contagious. The Simpson case demonstrated that with the right narrative, it is possible to convince millions to deny reality along with you, especially when the truth is far darker and more disappointing than the fiction being offered. Pathological narcissism offers a powerful lens through which to analyze a suspect's mind in a case like O.J. Simpson's. A core feature of narcissistic personality disorder is a grandiose sense of self-importance and the belief that one is special and unique, deserving of preferential treatment. This mindset creates a perception of being above the rules that apply to others. For a narcissist, laws and social norms are for ordinary people, not for them. This belief can explain the apparent lack of remorse and the capacity to commit atrocious acts. OJ's history of domestic violence is a classic indicator of this pattern. Assaults against a partner often stem from a need for control and from narcissistic rage when that control is challenged. Nicole's refusal to remain subjugated may have been perceived by him not just as the end of a relationship, but as an intolerable affront to his authority and ego. In a narcissistic mind, an injury to the ego can be so severe that it justifies disproportionate and violent retaliation, as the other person has failed to fulfill their function, to be a reflection of his grandiosity. During the trial, this grandiosity manifested in his conduct. He seemed more like a celebrity being inconveniently detained than a man fighting for his life. This attitude can be interpreted as a reflection of his internal belief that, in the end, his status would save him. He could not conceive of a universe where he, O.J. Simpson, could be permanently stripped of his freedom and adoration. This unwavering faith in his own special status may have been the source of his unnerving calm. Another aspect of narcissism is a profound lack of empathy. The ability to put oneself in others' shoes and feel their pain is limited or non-existent. This allows the narcissist to exploit and hurt others without feeling guilt. The way the trial focused entirely on him, on his story and his legacy, while the victims, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, were almost turned into footnotes in his saga, is a macroscopic reflection of a narcissistic mindset. The world revolves around him, and even in their deaths the victims become props in his personal drama. The later publication of the book If I Did It is perhaps the clearest and darkest manifestation of this psychology. The hypothetical title offers a veiled confession, allowing him to confess to the crime for profit and attention while maintaining plausible deniability. It is the ultimate act of narcissistic arrogance, to monetize the murder of two people and, at the same time, mock the justice system he defeated. This shows us that, for certain minds, guilt is not a burden to be carried but a story to be controlled, and, if possible, sold. We are only halfway through our journey into the complex mind of one of history's most famous suspects. If this analysis is challenging your perceptions, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And comment below, what other famous case would you like us to dissect on The Truth? Your suggestions shape the future of our channel. Gaslighting is an insidious form of psychological manipulation where the abuser tries to make their victim doubt their own perception, memory, and sanity. While it is most commonly discussed in the context of abusive relationships, the O.J. Simpson case can be seen as an example of gaslighting on a social scale. The defense's strategy and O.J.'s behavior worked to make the public and the jury doubt what seemed obvious. The evidence was overwhelming, but the defense systematically attacked it, not just to refute it, but to suggest that the reality presented by the prosecution was itself a fabrication. The narrative that the LAPD planted evidence is a classic example of gaslighting. Instead of confronting the proof itself, O.J.'s blood at the crime scene, the defense attacked the integrity of the proof. They insinuated that Detective Mark Furman, with his racist history, could have planted the bloody glove. This claim, though never proven, was enough to create an alternative reality. The new narrative was, you cannot trust your own eyes or the facts presented, because the people presenting them are liars and corrupt. This makes truth become relative and doubt. The only certainty O.J.'s behavior over the years complements this strategy. In interviews, he consistently painted himself as the true victim of the case, a victim of an unfaithful wife, of opportunistic friends, of a scandal-hungry media, and of a racist justice system. By perpetually positioning himself as the injured party, he inverts the dynamic of abuser and victim. This is a central tactic of gaslighting. The abuser refuses to take responsibility and instead blames the victim for their own pain, making them feel responsible for the abuse they suffer. The mind of a suspect who employs these tactics learns to live in a fabricated reality. He repeats the lie so often and with such conviction that it becomes his truth. The constant denial of the abuse against Nicole, despite police records and witness accounts, is a clear example. He wasn't just lying to others. He was likely engaging in self-gaslighting, rewriting his own past to fit his self-image as a wronged, good man. Memory becomes malleable, a tool in service of the ego. The legacy of the O.J. Simpson verdict is, in part, a legacy of successful gaslighting. It teaches us a terrifying lesson about how the perception of reality can be manipulated. When a powerful narrative, laden with emotion and mistrust, is introduced, facts can become secondary. Doubt, once planted, grows like a weed, choking the truth. The suspect's mind did not need to prove an alternative reality. It only needed to make enough people doubt the real one. In situations of extreme pressure, such as being the prime suspect in a double murder trial, the human survival instinct is activated at its most primal level. However, in the mind of an individual with psychopathic or severe narcissistic traits, this instinct operates differently. It is not necessarily linked to the preservation of physical life, but rather to the preservation of the ego and status. For O.J. Simpson, social death, the loss of fame, adoration, and lifestyle, was possibly a fate worse than prison. His fight, therefore, was for the survival of his persona. Dark psychology suggests that for certain individuals, conscience and remorse are abstract concepts, not genuinely felt emotions. The ability to sit through an entire trial, to hear the graphic details of the deaths of two people, including the mother of his children, and maintain a cold composure, points to a profound empathetic deficit. The survival instinct, in this context, is not tempered by guilt. It is a pure selfish force, focused solely on self-preservation, at any moral or human cost. O.J.'s actions immediately after the murders and during the chase can be viewed through this lens. The letter he wrote, which was read by Robert Kardashian, did not sound like that of an innocent man, but that of a man whose image was shattering. He spoke of his love for Nicole, but the main focus was himself, his accomplishments, and how he should be remembered. It was the suicide note of an ego, not a person. The instinct was not to seek justice or truth, but to control the final narrative of his life. This ego survival mentality also explains why such suspects can be so convincing in their denials. They are not just lying, they are fighting for their very definition of existence. The lie becomes the truth because the real truth is annihilation. The mind builds a psychological firewall, where any information that threatens the ego's structure is instantly rejected. This is not a conscious decision to lie, but an automatic reflex of a psyche that cannot process its own monstrosity. The case teaches us that when analyzing a suspect's mind, we cannot assume the presence of a functioning conscience like that of most people. The survival instinct of a master manipulator does not seek truth, forgiveness, or redemption. It seeks victory. The not guilty verdict was, for this mindset, the final confirmation that his survival strategy worked. He was not acquitted of a crime. He won the game, reaffirming his power to control reality and ensuring the survival, however tainted, of his precious persona. The O.J. Simpson case is more than the story of a crime. It is an enduring lesson about the fragile and contested nature of truth in the modern world. Dark psychology shows us that truth is not simply a collection of facts, but a narrative that competes for acceptance. The mind of a skilled suspect, aided by unlimited resources, can construct a counter-narrative so powerful that the facts become irrelevant. The verdict did not prove O.J.'s innocence. It proved that in a court of law and in the arena of public opinion, the best story often wins. We learned that charisma and fame are currencies of immense power, capable of buying doubt where there should be none. The admiration the public had for O.J. created a credibility capital that he used to the very last drop. This forces us into an uncomfortable reflection. How many times are our own perceptions of guilt or innocence shaped not by the evidence, but by our pre-existing affection or revulsion for an individual? Are we objective judges, or are we a susceptible audience, eager for our heroes to remain heroes? The case also exposed the cracks in our institutions and our society. O.J.'s defense masterfully exploited legitimate racial tensions in Los Angeles, turning a murder trial into a battleground for much larger social issues. While these issues were real and needed to be discussed, their use in the case served a manipulative purpose: to obscure the guilt of a rich and powerful man. This teaches us how just causes can be hijacked and used as a shield to protect individuals who have nothing to do with them. The psychology behind a suspect's mind like O.J.'s reveals a terrifying confidence in the ability to manipulate, the belief that it is possible to commit a terrible act and, through calculated performance, charm, and narrative distortion, escape the consequences. It is a chilling demonstration of contempt for the intelligence of others and for the very concept of responsibility. The legacy of the case is a dark reminder that justice can indeed be blind, not because it is impartial, but because it can be deliberately blinded by the smoke of manipulation. Finally, the most lasting lesson is about ourselves. The O.J. Simpson case held up a mirror to us, and many did not like what they saw. It showed how susceptible we are to manipulation, how group identity can override critical analysis, and how truth can be sacrificed on the altar of celebrity and entertainment. O.J.'s mind may remain an enigma in its details, but its impact was clear. It taught us that the fight for truth is often a battle against the darkest parts, not only of a suspect's mind, but of our own. The truth can be more complex and disturbing than any fiction. What we've seen today is how the tools of dark psychology, manipulation, narcissism, and narrative control are not just theoretical, but were used on one of the world's grandest stages. To continue unraveling the hidden mechanisms of the human mind, subscribe now to The Truth, Dark Psychology, turn on notifications to never miss an analysis, and leave your final comment. Was the O.J. Simpson case a failure of justice, or the triumph of manipulation? The truth, as always, lies in the shadows, waiting to be discovered.